the final breath, and eternal freedom. Some stories do not end in victory. They end in sacrifice. And those are the stories that live forever. William Wallace's story was one of them. August 23rd, 1305. The streets of London were filled with people. They had gathered to witness what they believed was the end of a rebel. But in truth, they were about to witness the making of a legend. William Wallace was brought in chains. His body was wounded, but his spirit was untouched. There was no fear in his eyes. He was sentenced to a punishment designed not just to kill, but to break a man completely. He was dragged, tortured, but he did not surrender. He did not beg for mercy. He did not bow. As his last moments approached, the crowd fell silent. Everyone waited. What would he say? And then he spoke a single word: freedom. It was not just a word. It was a message, a voice that would echo long after his death. On that day, William Wallace was executed. But did he truly lose? No, because in his death, he achieved something greater than victory. He awakened a nation. He destroyed fear. He turned freedom into a purpose, not just a dream. After Wallace's sacrifice, Scotland did not give up. From a quiet boy to the spark of rebellion, 13th century Scotland, a land of breathtaking beauty, but a nation living under fear. England's shadow loomed large, and ordinary people lived with silent oppression every day. In this land, around the year 1270, a boy was born. His name was William Wallace. William Wallace was not born into royalty. He was not a prince, nor the son of a king. He came from a simple Scottish family, but inside him lived something powerful, a deep sense of pride and a hunger for freedom. His father, Sir Malcolm Wallace, was a brave man who resisted English control. Because of this, young William grew up witnessing injustice with his own eyes. Then came the day that changed everything. English soldiers killed his father. It was not just a loss. It was a spark that would one day become a fire. After his father's death, William was sent to live with his uncle, a learned priest. There, he didn't just learn to read and write. He studied history, languages, and the deeper meaning of power and control. He began to understand something most people never do. Freedom is not just physical. True slavery begins in the mind, and a nation that accepts fear will never be free. A question slowly grew inside him. Are we meant to live like this forever? As he grew older, William became physically strong and imposing. He stood taller than most men, with a presence that naturally commanded attention. But he was still not a leader. Not yet. He was just a young man who could not accept injustice. He watched English soldiers mistreat his people. He saw fear in the eyes of his countrymen. Yet he stayed silent, not out of weakness, but because this was the silence before a storm. Even the strongest warriors have a soft side. For William, that was a woman named Marion Braidfute. Marion brought peace into his life. With her, he could forget the violence, the oppression, and the constant tension around him. They married in secret because even love was restricted under English rule. This marriage was more than love. It was hope, a dream of a simple, peaceful life. But history rarely allows peace to last. One day, English soldiers discovered Marion. They captured her, and then they executed her brutally. That moment was the end of William Wallace as he once was, or perhaps it was his beginning. After Marion's death, William was no longer the same man. There was only one thing left inside him: revenge and freedom. He launched his first attack against English soldiers. It wasn't a grand army. There was no perfect strategy. It was raw anger forged into action. And in that moment, a legend began to rise. His early rebellion was small, unorganized, and fragile. There were moments he had to retreat, moments when defeat seemed certain. But with every setback, he learned strength is not in numbers. Strength is in belief, and those who fight for truth never truly lose. This is not just a story. It is a message. Great leaders are not born, they are shaped. Pain does not destroy a man, it builds him. And even an ordinary person can change history. This was only the beginning. William Wallace had just picked up his sword. The real war was yet to come. From rebel to the hope of a nation. After Marion's death, William Wallace was no longer a man seeking a quiet life. Now, there was only one purpose inside him: freedom, at any cost, from spark to fire. In the beginning, Wallace had no grand army, no wealth, no powerful allies. Only a handful of men stood beside him. But there was one thing that set them apart: belief. He launched small, calculated attacks on English outposts, supply lines, and isolated soldiers. These were not massive victories, but they carried a powerful message. England is not invincible. Winning the people. With every success, more people began to join him. Farmers, laborers, ordinary men. Men who had once lived in fear were now ready to fight. Wallace didn't just teach them how to hold a sword. He taught them how to stand as free men. Accepting slavery is the greatest weakness. Freedom demands sacrifice, and fear must be defeated before any enemy. Slowly, a rebel was becoming a leader. The first great test, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, 1297. The year that would define Wallace's legacy. The English army was powerful, disciplined, and far larger in number. Compared to them, the Scottish forces seemed weak, but they had something far more dangerous: a leader who refused to kneel. The battlefield was Stirling Bridge, strategy that made history. Wallace didn't fight with brute force. He fought with intelligence. He allowed the English army to cross a narrow bridge when only a portion of their forces had crossed. He launched his attack. The English troops were trapped. No space to move forward. No way to retreat. It turned into complete chaos. And then, total destruction. A victory that changed everything. This was not just a win. It was a turning point. Scotland had defeated England for the first time. Hope spread across the land. William Wallace was no longer just a name. He became a symbol. He was named Guardian of Scotland. The challenges after victory. But success always brings new problems. Wallace pushed into northern England, launching further attacks. Yet his army lacked discipline. Not all of his men were trained. Soldiers, many were driven only by passion. This was a weakness, one that would soon cost him dearly. Internal conflicts. Not everyone in Scotland stood united. Some nobles still had ties with England. They disagreed with Wallace's methods. These divisions slowly began to grow, and they would soon become his greatest threat. Lesson of this chapter: a true leader doesn't just win battles, he wins hearts. Strategy can defeat even the strongest enemy, and sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought within. William Wallace was no longer just a rebel. He had become the hope of a nation. But where there is light, there is always shadow. Every story reaches a moment when success brings with it pride, weakness, and hidden danger. For William Wallace, that moment had arrived. After the great victory at Stirling Bridge, Wallace was no longer just a warrior. He had become the hope of an entire nation. But hope comes with responsibility. He was named Guardian of Scotland, a title powerful, yet fragile. Every decision he made now carried the weight of Scotland's future. 1298. This was the year when fate began to turn. The King of England, Edward I, marched into battle himself. This was no ordinary enemy. He was experienced, strategic, and ruthless. The battlefield was Falkirk. Wallace positioned his army in Schiltron formations, a strong defensive tactic, using tightly packed spearmen. But the English had something different: the longbow. English archers rained arrows from a distance, breaking the Scottish formations before close combat even began. Then came the cavalry charge, and everything collapsed. But the defeat was not just about weapons. It was also about division. Some Scottish nobles, who were supposed to stand with Wallace, withdrew during the battle. It wasn't just retreat, it was silent betrayal. Wallace was left exposed. The Battle of Falkirk ended in defeat for Wallace, and it revealed painful truths. Courage alone is not enough. Without unity, victory cannot last, and leadership depends on trust. After this defeat, Wallace made a difficult decision. He resigned as Guardian of Scotland. This was not weakness. It was sacrifice. He believed someone else might lead better in that moment. But Wallace did not surrender. He disappeared from the front lines, yet continued to resist. He launched smaller, hidden attacks, fighting for his people in silence. But things had changed. He was no longer the hero in open battle. He had become a hunted man, a shadow, being chased by an empire. This chapter teaches us every rise is followed by a test. Unity is the foundation of victory, and sometimes stepping back is a form of strength. William Wallace's fall had begun, but his story was far from over. Because the real test begins when everything is taken away. Every hero faces a moment when the enemy is no longer in front of him, but standing behind him. For William Wallace, that moment had come. After the defeat at Falkirk, Wallace disappeared from open battlefields. But he was not defeated. He was still fighting, just from the shadows. He launched sudden raids, struck English forces, and vanished before they could respond. It was a different kind of war, quiet but deadly. The King of England, Edward I of England, no longer saw Wallace as just a rebel. He saw him as a threat, a man who could continue a war without an army. So he gave a clear order: find Wallace at any cost. A reward was announced: wealth, land, power, all promised to anyone who could capture Wallace. This was the moment of truth. And sadly, some chose greed over loyalty. A Scottish noble, a man history would never forget, Sir John Deemingteeth. He earned Wallace's trust, and then he betrayed him. 1305. One night, when Wallace believed he was safe, he was surrounded. There was no great battle, no heroic last stand, just betrayal and a legend in chains. Wallace was taken as a prisoner to London. He was displayed before the public as if he were a dangerous criminal. But in truth, he was a man who had fought for freedom. Some people mocked him, some stayed silent, and some respected him in their hearts. In London, he was put on trial, but there was no justice. It was a performance. He was accused of treason. Wallace replied, "I could not be a traitor. I never swore loyalty to the King of England." Those words defined who he truly was. The verdict had already been decided: punishment, death, in the most brutal way possible. This was not just execution. It was a warning, a message to anyone who dared to resist. This chapter teaches us the most dangerous enemies are often the closest. Greed can destroy loyalty, and a man who stands for truth remains free, even in chains. William Wallace was now a prisoner, but his spirit was still unbroken. And sometimes, a man's final moments become the beginning of a nation's future. The final breath and eternal freedom. Some stories do not end in victory. They end in sacrifice. And those are the stories that live forever. William Wallace's story was one of them. August 23rd, 1305. The streets of London were filled with people. They had gathered to witness what they believed was the end of a rebel. But in truth, they were about to witness the making of a legend. William Wallace was brought in chains. His body was wounded, but his spirit was untouched. There was no fear in his eyes. He was sentenced to a punishment designed not just to kill, but to break a man completely. He was dragged, tortured, but he did not surrender. He did not beg for mercy. He did not bow. As his last moments approached, the crowd fell silent. Everyone waited. What would he say? And then he spoke a single word: freedom. It was not just a word. It was a message, a voice that would echo long after his death. On that day, William Wallace was executed, but did he truly lose? No, because in his death, he achieved something greater than victory. He awakened a nation. He destroyed fear. He turned freedom into a purpose, not just a dream. After Wallace's sacrifice, Scotland did not give up. A new leader rose, Robert the Bruce, and in 1314, at the Battle of Bannockburn, Scotland struck back. It was a decisive step toward freedom. William Wallace may not have lived to see freedom, but he made it inevitable. He proved that one person can change history. Sacrifice is never wasted. Freedom always comes at a price. This is not just the story of a man. It is a mindset. Never bow to oppression. Stand for truth, no matter the cost. And even if you stand alone, you are not wrong. William Wallace died, but his voice still lives. Every time someone stands for freedom, his story lives again. Because some men do not die, they become history. What if one man could challenge an empire? What if one voice could awaken a nation? Today's story is about courage, sacrifice, and freedom. A man with no crown, but a spirit that refused to bow. He chose to stand. This is the story of William Wallace. Freedom always comes at a price. Never bow to oppression. Stand for truth, no matter the cost. Some men do not die. They become history. Subscribe for more powerful stories. Until then, take care.